Hi everyone, welcome. Welcome to Kama DC's panel on welcoming immigrant students to our communities over here, to our school systems. We'll wait a couple of minutes for others to join in too. So we'll start maybe in 2 or 3 minutes. All right, welcome everyone. I think we are ready to begin here. So, welcome to Storytelling Night organized by Kama DC. My name is Sadaf Kazi. I'm a volunteer at Kama DC, which is a volunteer run organization in Washington, DC, and provides a platform for immigrants in DC, Maryland, and Virginia to share their skills and stories. And we highlight these skills and stories with the hope that immigrants in our community can share with us their skill-based workshops, cooking classes, storytelling nights, film screenings, and a lot of other skills that they bring to our area. So our panel this evening is on welcoming immigrant students into school environments in the US. And specifically today, we are focusing on improving support for immigrant students whose families have newly arrived in the US. So, as all of us know, attending a new school can be very daunting, and especially for students and families who are unfamiliar with the language and with the school system in the US, because there's a lot to navigate in the K through 12 school system, but there do not seem to be a lot of resources dedicated to helping these immigrant families that can help them get oriented and settled in their new communities. So our panel today comprises educators who have a lot of experience in policy making as well as practical experience in engaging with immigrant students through their work. And more importantly, we also have panelists who have had the rich experience of emigrating to the US as students. So today we will be joined by Dr. Emma Violin Sanchez, Mercy Ogutu, Camilla Panama, Anisu Masube, and Yili Kim. I will be moderating the panel today. From my perspective as an immigrant, I have come here from India, and my experience will be from the perspective of someone who has had graduate school experience in the US. So with that, very excited to formally welcome all of our panelists. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for all the participants for joining us this evening. So our first panelist is Dr. Emma Violin Sanchez. She was a member of the Arlington Public School Board from 2008 to 2016 and was an adjunct faculty at Georgetown University for 20 years. She retired in 2007 as a supervisor of programs and services for English language learners in the Arlington Public Schools at Virginia. Dr. Violin is the founder and chair emeritus of the Board of Dream project that has been awarded several accolades for her work. So welcome, Dr. Violin Sanchez. Thank you so much for joining us today. To begin with, if you can share with us your experience in engaging with newly arrived immigrant students in the US, how has that been like? What has your experience been like as a whole?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here today. Muchas gracias. I just want to tell you just a little bit about myself, because I think that my work as an educator in the United States, you know, it was one of the strengths was that I came to this country as an immigrant student myself when I was 16, without my family, to live with an American family as a nanny taking care of children, but I was allowed to go to high school. And although I didn't speak English and my experience at Mount Vernon High School was very difficult because of the language barrier and because of not having my family support, yet I feel that I have the strength that I had the support of the family, the Paulsons, the family that I worked for. They really believed in me and they thought that I should go to college, and they supported me, and I was able to get a scholarship to the university, Radford University, and become a teacher. So that experience also grounds me in the fact that my work with immigrants and refugees in the Arlington community, and especially as an educator supervising programs for these students I started in 1976 with refugees from Indochina, Vietnamese, Laotian, Cambodians. Later we have, of course, Latinos, Salvadorians, Bolivians, Central Americans, and other languages. In the Arlington Public School, we had over 100 countries represented, but the majority were from Latin America. And I think that the strengths of developing good programs that recognize not just the fact that these students don't speak English and they do need support, but we also, from the beginning, we believed in the sociocultural aspects of learning, so that the students and their families need support, starting with the registration process, which is overwhelming. And now that everything is online, it really, a newcomer has so much difficulty just going to school and signing up for school and getting enrolled. And so we started that intake center, but now we call it welcoming center, that also offered classes in the native language of the students. Unfortunately, many of those classes have not been continued after I was no longer a supervisor. We had bilingual classes in Vietnamese, in Korean, in Spanish, because really the bilingualism is a cultural educational asset. And I know in our schools, it's an English only method. And unfortunately, that does not recognize the first language of the students. And so, because I believe that if we have programs that are additive versus subtractive, it could make a significant difference. And now as a retiree, my advocacy is for undocumented students. I don't even like to call them undocumented, but students who have barriers getting into college due to their immigration status. And as a nonprofit, as a founder of a nonprofit, we have been able to fund scholarships for 100 students for 6 years so that they can be successful in college. We have an amazing students that after they graduate from high school, they do not have opportunities to continue with their education. And I think that is essential to support the students, not just while they are in the K through 12 system, but also at the university level. And I hope all of us working together, we can provide better programs and services. Immigrant students bring a lot of strengths to our schools, and they need our support.
Thank you, Dr. Violin Sanchez. Thank you for sharing your experiences with us. So I had a question for you. So you went through your personal experiences, things that helped you. What were the challenges that you faced? In your view, were the barriers that you had faced as when you were an immigrant student, have those barriers changed somewhat? Have they kind of remained the same? What are your views about that?
Well, I immigrated in 1961. It's a long time ago. So I think that we have nowadays more barriers than back then. When I came, my visa, I don't remember if I entered as I think I entered as a tourist, but I ended up staying here. But I was able to go to Social Security and get my Social Security card. I was able to get a foreign student scholarship in college. I was able to later drive, and then I did become a resident and later a US citizen because I married a US citizen who unfortunately died in the war in Vietnam, and I was able to get benefits. But I think that currently the barriers are much greater than they were before. There is no way that many of our undocumented families currently can get access to services, to access to in-state tuition, to scholarships, and many of them always are they work under the radar. And it's a traumatic experience because many of them had traumatic experience coming to the United States, many of them crossing the border or other ways. And that traumatic experience continues as they don't see hope for change. We have DACA, the deferred action that now, unfortunately, they can still renew, but many students are not eligible to DACA. So I think the barriers are greater. And unfortunately, in the past the past years, there was such a negative perception of immigrants, and many of the students and their families have an added weight on them that is because the negativism about helping immigrants. But they have resilience and they overcome. And fortunately, the K through 12 system with the Plyer versus Doe Supreme Court decision, we have access to free public education in the K through 12 system, which is a great support and asset.
Thank you so much. And I'm sure we will have a lot of questions for all of our panelists. So feel free to also start thinking of questions. We'll have a Q&A session later. So with that, I'd like to welcome our second panelist, Mercy Ogutu. Welcome, Mercy. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for talking to us about your experience. So Mercy she was born in Kisumu, Kenya, and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. She attended K through 12 in DeKalb County, Georgia, and had a journey of going to a less diverse elementary, middle, and high school. But that experience inspired her to expand diversity in the education sector. As a DACA student growing in a low-income community, she was inspired by her school journey to be a voice, volunteer, and advocate for immigrant students. So thank you so much, Mercy, for joining us today, and especially sharing about your experience as an immigrant student. So if you can share with us a little bit about how it was growing up in Atlanta or in DeKalb. So I went to Georgia Tech, so you know that I'm pretty familiar with the Atlanta area. So it's nice to meet like someone from the area. But if you can share with us your experience as an immigrant student, especially when you had first arrived to the US.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mercy Gutu, and I'm currently a junior here at Trinity Washington University, double majoring in political science and international affairs. And I'm excited to be here. For me, like I've been here in the US since I was 5. I came here to Atlanta, Georgia, not really knowing what like America was, but seeing like the TV shows when I was growing up, I was like, okay, I'm ready. This is a new experience, but I was very excited. Um, but somehow my imagination of how the US would be actually turned into a reality scene that sometimes what you see on TV is not really what it's like in person. And um, the area that I grew up in North Decatur, which is like a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia, um, was very, so first it was a I guess innocent journey because I went to mostly predominantly white school from elementary to middle school and high school, and that made me see the difference of how like especially like immigrant students are treated, but also how schools are not really diverse when it comes to resources and acceptance. I didn't even know that there was different types of English because in Kenya we're taught the British English, and here in the US it's the American English, and that also did affect me because even though I was very fluent in the English since like I came here since I was 5, I had to take like different tests to see if I needed to take like be like you. So well, the classes which I didn't, but I couldn't really read that well until like I was in 3rd grade. So that did put me behind my classmates because I was given more like easier tasks that really weren't helpful when it came to my education growth. And for me, just experiencing like elementary school and middle school and high school, that did affect me because I often felt like I was very separated from my peers, and also just grew up in a very low income area and household. Like I wasn't able to do like many things that my peers did, like such as being like in different clubs, like the science club or being on the soccer team or doing like the Girl Scouts and stuff. That also did affect me because everybody they made friends from being in clubs or playing on the same team or being like in programs like such as the gifted program. And for me, I just felt like I was very isolated, and the isolation did grow from elementary to middle school and high school, but especially in high school because throughout your whole like education journey, just each year like your teachers ask you what you want to be, and even if you're able to one day achieve your dreams, no one tells you how like to start your dreams, and that really did hit me when I was in high school when I wanted to do political science and one day to be like a policy advisor. I didn't even know what DACA was until like I was applying to college applications, and that to me like I felt very alone because in Georgia, um, Georgia's a very diverse state, but in Georgia, there's not enough opportunities and resources for DACA students and also other students with different immigration statuses to get the resources of knowing how to apply for college or whether they're eligible for in-state or out-of-state tuition or federal or state grants and other scholarships. And through my struggle as a DACA student, not being able to have the opportunity to be eligible for like for FAFSA, like in-state and also the like out-of-state tuition and scholarships, I was able to be a voice for students my senior year, but advocating like at the state capitol by writing to my congressional members in DC and also in Georgia, and also And also I'll even having a senior thesis of why Georgia DACA students should be eligible for the like in-state tuition. Many people, I started to like advocate for DACA when I was a sophomore. Since my sister was actually applying for college my sophomore year, but I did advocate since like I was about 16 at the state capitol, because not many people know the struggles of DACA students. But that inspired me to know that even though there is a challenge, you can be the solution to that problem that some people may overlook or are too afraid to speak up. Oh, sorry, women in warning. But for me, just knowing that like, I'm a DACA student, that inspired me to come to DC to study politics, to study policy, and to learn how I can make a change when I graduate. But also now, by being a mentor for DACA students here in DC, Georgia, and Maryland, and knowing that being a voice to immigrants and knowing that your immigration status should not limit you to your goal, but inspire you to overcome those barriers, to make a change, but also to reach your goal along the journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Mercy. That was a lot of challenges that you mentioned, especially, I think a lot of immigrants are familiar with this about coming to the US, having to repeat competencies. Again, I grew up in India speaking British English. I still have to kind of change the way I say some words so Americans understand them. So I know that. I also think that it is amazing that as you were fighting to get resources for yourself, you also started your advocacy work, trying to like navigate all of these things, not just for yourself, but also to bring light to the issue for others. So that I think is really, really great, really admirable work. And we have a lot of people on the chat also who have recognized this, and kudos to you really for sharing your story with us and sharing your journey. I'm sure others, if anyone has more questions for Mercy or any of our panelists, please feel free to put them in the chat. Right. So with this, I'll move on to our third speaker, our third speaker is Camilla Panama. Camilla was born in El Salvador, but then left for Florida to escape the Civil War. Early on in her career, she worked in both Florida and El Salvador in various teaching positions. And in 2016, she joined the District of Columbia public school system to become an ELL SPED teacher. So thank you so much for joining us, Camilla, for talking about your experiences. Thanks for taking the time to share everything with our panelists today. So if you can tell us a little bit about yourself and about your experience engaging with newly arrived immigrant students in the US.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, it's an honor to be here. If you guys see me moving a lot, it's because I was out in the park, but the mosquitoes were eating me alive. So I have to walk and talk now. But I've been a teacher for 15 years. I've worked with both ELL and special education students. And the thing that has always come back to me is if our ELL kids or any kid at all does not feel safe in the environment that they are in, it is very hard to get them to learn anything at all. So when I was coming to the States for college and I knew the language, I have been in the States several times. But when I was dropped off in college, mind you, I knew all this, it was just a culture shock. And so I didn't feel safe. It wasn't my home. So I have that experience of just not feeling secure. And so with that, now when I have students who are just coming into the country, my first thing to do is to try to find a connection with them, to their culture, to their family, to something that I can connect. Because as I connect with them, I can start to make them feel safe in their environment. They can start to trust me. And that is the way that they learn. So that's, for me as an educator, the most important thing when having the honor of having students who have just come into the country. I had a little girl who had probably been in the country for 1 week, and was very angry. She was just angry. She would roll her eyes at everything. Very hard to connect with her. But I kept, just little by little each day. And then 1 week after her being my student, she tells me more her story of how she immigrated into the country, how she was in a trailer and they were left in the cold and no food for several days. And there were men in there who tried to do things. So you start getting the picture of, oh my God, they have been through so much. So all they need right now from me is a safe space. So it's making my classroom that safe space. Also, when I try to take them on as many field trips as possible, because if not, I feel like they stay within their homes and probably school and just are afraid to see other things. So we usually take a lot of field trips. I teach them how to ride the metro. The bus is complicated for them. And also I took them to see a play at Kennedy Center. And at first they were like, no, that's only for white kids. Like, why would you take me there? They're gonna laugh at us and all this and that. And so we made it happen and they got there and they had the time of their lives. So there are so many stories I could tell you about students who I've had that have just, had incredible stories to say. And I'm like in awe of their resilience and how they're still coming to school and smiling and making me smile. So yeah, that's what I can tell you about this journey with immigrant students.
Thank you, Camilla. Thanks for sharing that. And I think it's so important that you highlighted that, without that sense of psychological and emotional safety, it's just so difficult to learn. When you don't have that, you don't even have the resources to really engage in any kind of intellectual learning. And that may really then, like one type of trauma, it really ends up delaying the things that you can acquire when you are in school. So thank you for highlighting that. And it's also really nice hearing about your experience in getting them like familiarized, like with just the metro system, like taking them to the Kennedy Center. I think that was really awesome, and finding that thing to connect with your students, making them feel safe with you, and then using that as a foundation for learning. I think that is so important, and the work that you do is so valuable. So thank you so much for that.
My pleasure.
Yeah. And everyone feel free to, I see a lot of questions coming here. So we'll get to those great questions, great comments. We'll get to those after we are done with all the panelists, but please feel free to keep engaging in the chat with your questions. So I'll move on to our fourth panelist for today. He is Anisu Masube, who is currently a data engineer for one of the DMV public school systems. He holds a master's in sustainable development and social innovation from the SIT Graduate Institute and a BSc honors in computer science from the National University of Science and Technology in Zimbabwe. Anisu first came to the US in 2016 through an 18-month Atlas Corps Fellowship through American Express Foundation in New York, and is also an IDEX Global Fellowship alumni in India. He's passionate about data for good, technology for development, youth empowerment, and communications for change, and is the founder of Opportunities for Zimbabweans and co-founder of the space, and is an active public speaker and podcaster. So thank you so much for joining us today, Anisu, for contributing to our panel. If you can help us understand about your experience as an immigrant coming to the US, and specifically now, like, you know, it's very interesting that you're also crossing over into the public school system. So if you can help us understand that experience too.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you for giving me the chance to share my story and to, most importantly, to listen to all these amazing journeys and stories that teachers, former teachers, and students are having as being part of the immigrant community, particularly in the DMV. I'm mostly going to speak about my experience as an immigrant, more so than my work at the current public school system, because I'm not sure what I'm allowed to say or not say. When I first came to the States, having been born and raised in Zimbabwe, did all my education there, primary school, high school, as previous speakers mentioned, a British school system. So everything, you know, it's in the British sort of school system. Even worked in Zimbabwe for a little bit before I started living abroad. Also lived in India, which is another British sort of school system or ways to do things. So when I came here, even though I was later on in my career, I was in my mid-20s, I felt like I already had experience, I'd already traveled the world, but the culture shock or the realization that, oh, well, people do things differently here really struck me when I came here, right? Even in terms of just writing certain words, I would be putting an S where they're supposed to be a Z, or like small things like that, that I felt like, of course, I know the spelling of that word, but then my manager would return, you know, an email to me underlined and like corrections line by line. And it almost made me feel like, wait, I thought I was more intelligent or smarter than this. And I always wondered if that was going to be better if, let's say, I came to study undergrad in the US, right? And then I was like, oh, what more if I came as a high schooler to the US? Maybe, you know, all these kind of writing skills, my accent would be more American. So I always would meet like other immigrants who came here 10, 15 years ago. And I always looked at them as if, I think you're better off. I just came here, and then almost not validating their own challenges because I did not come here for primary school or high school or undergrad. I was looking at it from my own lens. But immediately what I figured out is most of these immigrant stories and journeys are very similar. The more you're gonna hear, even people speaking on this panel, the challenges are almost the same. How do you adopt to the culture? How do you your language? I mean, I cannot even think of, I was hearing Dr. Emma speaking about language support in school. I cannot even dream of Shona being spoken in any school in the DMV because, again, such a small language, small country. Other languages are bigger, other countries are bigger. So I cannot even start to think how possible it is to speak, let's say, Shona, which is one of the native Zimbabwe language in the DMV. But however, I think what becomes important is communities. What helped me really to settle well in this DMV area is the ability to find other Zimbabweans that live in the area. Just speak with them. How did they settle? What organizations helped them with either their immigration papers, either their sort of career guidance. And the more you start talking to these people, the more you almost start feeling that community of support, right? You hope and wish that community and support is also available at the schools you go to. And I really advocate for that. But the reality of the matter, like I said as well, the DMV is so diverse that we almost have every nationality and every country in this area. So how best can you actually, cater for these different groups at each and every different school, as diverse as the certain schools are. How important do organizations like CAMA then kick in, or other, organizations that support immigrant groups, and how best can teachers and schools sort of work with them and be a part of an entire ecosystem, because it's all connected. It's connected to your home, to your parents, to the people that you came with, to the way that you came with here. Like, I think I'm more interested in hearing about finding that synergy in terms of how can, schools connect with communities and people, so that people like Camilla can go to the root of helping each and every student by understanding sort of their needs and the communities that they come from. And just sort of adding sort of to that, while sometimes it might look like a disadvantage, being an immigrant, you don't speak the language, you don't speak the accent, I think it's also becoming a strength, right? To show an ability that you are able to live in multiple different places and adaptability. We live in such a global world now where it's almost required of this younger generation to, to be exposed to things beyond only, the communities you grew in. So my advice almost becomes, start looking at it as a strength, right? The ability to know multiple cultures, multiple languages, can only but such a beneficial sort of tool for every student in their career, particularly later on in their later stages of their career, because I've definitely benefited from the fact that I am a Zimbabwean who has lived and worked in India and now moved to the US. I'm in a lot of rooms that there are not a lot of people that have sort of that background. So sometimes sort of embrace it. And because it is a strength, it's actually separates you from a lot of people who don't have that experience. And I think we live in a world where now we are requiring and looking for more and more of that kind of diversity. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Aniso. And yeah, this message of how, we come from all of these different backgrounds, that is a difference, but that is actually a strength that ends up just enriching the entire community, because you're able to draw on from all of these other experiences also. And it's just about what can you teach others, what can you learn from others, and how do you also take pride in the place that you come from. So I think it's so important to have that, and especially as immigrant students, as all the challenges that you mentioned, when you came here, you thought that, oh, like I thought I knew this well, and I'm messing up like all of these spellings. All the things that you were saying, they were really speaking to me too, and I'm sure like a lot of other immigrant students too. So when you start realizing them as, okay, this is just like a different way of doing things instead of this is the wrong way of doing things, I think that really is the key, and I think that is a message that we need to broaden further. So thank you so much. We have a lot of questions coming in the chat. Please feel free to continue putting these questions in, and we'll go to our last speaker now. So our fifth panelist today is Evie Kim, who is a fifth grade teacher in Pinecrest Elementary School in Montgomery County, Maryland. She was born in Seoul, South Korea, and immigrated to the United States with her parents and sister in 2003. Evie was raised in Baltimore, Maryland, where she learned to speak English as her second language while simultaneously adjusting culturally to the US. She then attended Towson University to study elementary education and graduated with honors in 2019. As a teacher who works with ESOL students of diverse backgrounds and once an ESOL student herself, Evie is able to utilize her personal experiences and training as a teacher to better support immigrant children and their families as they transition into the US school systems. She hopes to inspire her students to cherish their education and individualities within the systems. So thank you so much for joining us today, Evie. Welcome to the panel. Can you tell us a little bit more about your experiences in engaging with students? And I believe you are one, you engage with, I think, one of the younger students that we have from all of our educators on the panel today. So it'll be great having your experiences in engaging with these students now.
Yes, thank you so much, Sadif, for having me. Hello, everyone. My name is Evie Kim. And again, first and foremost, thank you, Sadif, and also Kama for organizing such a special event that I have the honor to speak at. So I was so thrilled when a friend of mine, and she's actually here, her name is Angie, so shout out to you. She asked me to participate in this panel. And the reason why I was so thrilled was because I also grew up as a student from an immigrant family. Like Sadif has said, my family and I are from South Korea, and we too had to overcome many challenges such as language barriers, not knowing any English coming here, and cultural differences as well. However, these challenges, along with my parents who forced me to go to Korean school every week and told me to never lose sight of my Korean identity, as well as my amazing teachers who have helped me literally learn how to read and write English and supported me throughout school. You know, all of this have truly shaped me to become like the person that I am today and to the teacher that I am today as well. So speaking of, I am currently a fifth grade teacher at Montgomery County Public Schools. I have had the privilege to work with many English language learners or ELL students. Many of my students speak Spanish, so it has actually been a personal goal of mine to learn Spanish in order to communicate with the students and their parents as well. I know a little bit, I can hold a conversation, but it definitely needs some work. So to help with that and to help with the engagement as well, kind of like how Camilla said, wanting to build that safe space for my students. One thing that I like to do with my students every day is we have like a Korean word and Spanish word of the day. So I teach my students a Korean word, and my students that speak Spanish teach the rest of the class the Spanish word. And they absolutely love it. And especially my newcomers, students who have just moved to the US and don't really know English that well at all, they really, their eyes just lit up when I had that activity. And so hopefully I can continue that and continue to build that safe and kind of that appreciation for all cultures in my classroom. I do want to do my very best for my students because I too was an ESOL student growing up, and I also struggled with English. I have this one memory that my teacher told me that I could borrow a book, but I ended up taking it home forever because I didn't understand what borrowed meant. And so I did get in trouble, but I returned it, I promise. So I had an ESOL student that really helped me just learn and not only appreciate the American culture, but also incorporated my Korean culture in her lessons as well. So I hope to also be able to be a teacher like my old ESOL teacher to all of my students. But I do recognize that I did have a privilege to have such a dedicated teacher and a teacher who paid a lot of attention to me, as a class has like 25 to 30 students. But my hope is still that I could really reach at least one student each year. And, you know, although that these are my personal experiences and insights, I hope to share some more valuable things throughout this panel time that I've learned as a teacher for immigrant students in our US school system with you all today. So again, thank you for having me. And yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us. I think, like you said, I love that activity of a Korean and a Spanish word for the day. I think that is so important in having students like have them feel like at home, you know, almost like integrating their identities into what they're learning, which is so important. So now we will move on to our open discussion. We have a couple of questions already for our panelists, but feel free to drop in more questions or use the raise hand feature, and you can directly ask a questions to our panelists also. So our first question is for all of our panelists. And the question is, what do those who run schools, for example, like I think administrators, so for example, school principals, what do they need to know in order to make kids feel safe, protected, and encouraged to learn and do their best? And this is for newly arrived immigrant students. So what can school administration do to welcome these students and make them feel safe? Yeah, we can start off with Dr. Violin Sanchez.
I think that principals can make a great deal of difference in a school if they have an open door policy, if they welcome students in, again, like Yeli, I don't know if I'm mispronouncing your name, is having words in the different languages represented in the students, having flags, having a welcoming environment as the students come to school, and welcoming parents, especially. I have seen principals who allowed parents to come during breakfast to have breakfast with their children. Not that that the parents had the free breakfast, but the fact that they sat with their children and allowed them to sit with them during breakfast time, or to have a Friday group of parents, or to have different books of different languages in the library. They can do so many things. What type of staff development they offering? Do they try to learn a different language? The principal can really make a significant difference to welcoming our new immigrant students, and really all students. And that leadership translates to the teachers too. Unfortunately, currently in many schools, starting in Arlington, which really bothered me to no end, they started requiring that parents have to show a picture ID before coming into school. That in itself is a way of telling parents, especially those who don't have a government issue ID, to say you are not welcome in school. And that has really provided a chill effect in parents being welcomed in school.
Thank you for sharing all of those great tips. Camilla and Yili, from your experiences also right now, teaching these students actively, do you have any other suggestions that you would like to add?
So yeah, just adding to what Dr. Violin Sanchez said, it's admin is such an important part of our team. They can make the families feel welcomed. I know in our school, they were holding, they could start learning English for free. And there's like cafecito with the principal, which just by the word sounds more inviting to a family that has just come into the country. So I think it's really important. I was reading the chat, and Marwa, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. She's asking about how to help like Afghan refugees right now get acclimated to what is going on, and especially because they have so much attention on them. I think it's not an easy task. What was that?
Oh, sorry. I think that was probably somebody who was just accidentally unmuted.
Oh, but I think the best thing you could do, or I've found to help in many of the cases, is to first find a connection, whether it's, when I have a student who I don't know the language and is coming in, I show pictures of things that I think we can connect, whether it be, right now, video games for them, like Fortnite, or just, I connected with a student because of Kirby, which is, such
I don't know if you guys know about it, but it's this video game that's super old. But he drew me a picture of Kirby, and then I drew him a picture back. And so we started connecting like that. So it's just finding that one connection and not giving up on them, because it's going to be hard, especially with everything they've experienced and all the attention they have with them. So just being constant. And I think if you're trying with love and showing them love, they'll respond. At one point they'll respond, and you'll be able to make that connection and be able to help them.
Thank you, Camilla. Yili, do you have anything to add from your perspective on that?
Yes, so to add on to both, and specifically how the school can support families, like Dr. Violin Sanchez said, providing more like opportunities such as different nights or like reading nights. I know my school does a reading night where they invite families, and parents can learn how to teach and help and support their students at home, as well as providing just all information translated into the needed language, I think is extremely important as well, and has at least helped the students and families at my school to feel more welcomed, and to not be afraid to ask questions as well. So, yeah.
Thank you, Yili. Mercy, from your perspective as a student, what do you think would have helped you, or what do you think the principal or other administrators could have done to improve your experience?
I think for me, it's just the resources, like especially when I was in high school, just in high school, middle school, there's so many clubs and so many different activities the students they can be part of, but there's not information that's going out to the students to know about it. But also as relates to the primary level, a lot of us are still adjusting. And one unique thing that I did about my elementary experience, since it was it was a very diverse school, but just the environment itself was not really diverse. There was over 50 countries, whatever students within the school, but there wasn't enough education of different cultures. So maybe for holidays, for Chinese New Year or different holidays, the school, they can incorporate that holiday or tradition into the curriculum, because I feel the more you know about different cultures, the more students will be willing to learn and be understanding of the different cultures that their peers are part of in a way.
Yeah, great points. Thank you, Mercy. Anisu, yeah, if you have any suggestions on, and this is related to the next question of, as a newly arrived immigrant, what resources would have helped you? Maybe I know that you came in after you had a significant experience, but now, working in the DMV school system, what resources do you think would be ideal to provide to immigrant students to improve their experiences and their adaptation over here?
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the main thing is, in the first place, for you to even be able to support immigrant children, you have to know about those immigrant children, right? I know this sounds very obvious, but not a lot of systems are actually collecting, understanding that what is our population like, right? Are we, collecting first generation immigrants, their journeys, when did they arrive to the country? All that kind of information is not always, I don't think it's always available either through the school systems or to the teachers or the principal. So if a principal doesn't even really know the journeys of these children, not knowing, what the registration processes for different school systems are like. But I think from a high level, it starts with prioritizing, understanding that our population is immigrant children. So how best actually can you incorporate that even when registering, right? So that you actually know that you have a specific demographic of students that are from country A, B, C, D. Hence, you collect their languages, first language, second language, language of parents, all those kind of things. And I know it's a lot, it can be a lot on top of already the many things that, schools and teachers have to deal with. But yeah, for you to be able to help someone, you have to know who that someone is. So I think there's need for a high level from even school systems to registration system to be able to capture that data and be able to actually know who the students are. Then from there, it's a matter of, okay, identifying, like you mentioned, the resources that are available, whether within the school, specific teachers, resources, school counselors, and I go back to organizations or people in the area that work with immigrants, that work with kids, and for the school to be able to direct students outside, because again, it's not just about when they're at school, it's about during the weekends, certain community events and things like that. So I think also parents or guardians of immigrants need to reach out more, right? To reach out for help, because it's harder for students, for kids to do that on their own, right? So I know a lot of cultures, particularly from Africa, from developing countries, there's sometimes a hesitancy, which, our parents will also be facing their own challenges, right? But there's a hesitance of them, calling out for help or going and joining some of these communities or being vulnerable, right? Because again, it's from that area of being vulnerable sometimes that people realize you need help and you can sort of find that help. So encouraging not just students, but guardians and parents to open up, to seek for this help and to connect and network. And I'm sure there are a number of resources and organizations and people in the community. Sometimes it's just a matter of knowing where to find these things. So if you open yourself up and if the data is there to show which are immigrant children, it should be even easier to connect the resources to people that actually need them.
Thank you, Anisu. And I think you made this great point of we need to try and give them these resources, not just in the school, but even outside, in the larger community. And I think another thing to keep in mind is that people may ask for help in different ways, or in some cultures, they may not learn how to ask for help in the ways that we are used to hearing about, that, oh, I need help this way. So it's important to probably be sensitive to that and just try and make as much information available to people, maybe through different avenues, different trusted sources that may not necessarily be people in the school system. It could be just members of the community in general. I think we are getting a little bit close to our time. I just wanted to go to a last question about how best to support new Afghan communities who are arriving in the DMV area. So I know that Dr. Violin Sanchez, you have put in a lot of really good suggestions in chat, but I was wondering if you had any other things to share with us on how do we best support these newly arrived immigrant children in the DMV area?
Well, I think with new Afghani, it's very important as soon as possible to have, volunteers that are bilingual and know the culture to support the transition, not just to the students, but also to the families. They have gone through a lot of trauma. And so what is the best way culturally to make them feel comfortable? And many of us that have worked with English language learners, we don't know. So we need to learn. And that is something that is so important. I have, just to give you an example, I have a very good friend who she is an ESL teacher. she opened her home to an Afghani family. And she's trying to teach them English. She's trying to register them to school. She's doing everything she can to help them. But she notices, the big gaps that are in, for example, in schooling and many things. So really, we need more people that can provide that emotional, social, but also the schools have to use funds to hire the people that can help the students. In addition to our regular staff, ELL staff who tend to be very committed.
Do any of our other panelists have other suggestions on, in addition to these great points that Dr. Violin Sanchez made? Yeah, you go ahead.
So I personally have not experienced any of students from that culture or background. So I think for me as an educator is to educate myself on different cultures that I don't know as much. And, as teachers, we're always, taught to teach. And, it's really important as teachers for us to learn from our students as well. So I think for me, taking, reflecting on myself that I would, next time learn more about that and also follow what Dr. Violin Sanchez has said as well.
All right, well, thank you so much to our panelists for joining us today. This was a really great discussion. Thank you for sharing all your rich experiences with us. I think all of us are walking away with really great ideas on how better we can support immigrant children who are arriving in the US, the types of resources needed, the types of emotional, psychological support that we can also provide to them to try and improve their education. A couple of things, we've had really good suggestions. The International Night was another great suggestion that came up on the chat, and we have a lot of good resources that were also mentioned, a couple of organizations. If anyone has any questions today, feel free to email us on the info@kamadc.org. We can put that email on chat. If you have specific questions for our panelists, feel free to put it in that. In addition to this, we also have our social accounts. It's called the Immigrants of the DMV. So that gives you a peek into lives of immigrants that live in the DC, Maryland, Virginia region. And if you're interested in taking over the handle, just let us know and we'll be happy to coordinate that with you. We also have, we're also on Instagram, so follow us on kama.dc. And our next event is September 30th, in which we're celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month. So that will be our next storytelling night, and we hope all of you guys can join us. So follow our handles, and we will also have information on our website. So again, thank you so much to all of our panelists for joining us today, for sharing your experiences. Thank you for the audience members for asking really good questions, putting in all of your suggestions. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the evening. Thank you.